Hello, welcome to Tap That MTG, the show where we tell you everything we know about magic. That's probably wrong,
but fun to talk about.
Very fun to talk about. Today we are going to talk about. Oh, right. I'm Shauna.
I'm Leslie.
And today we're going to talk about all those weird words that those magic players like to use, and you're like, "What? Are you speaking a different language?" Yeah, they kind of are. So we're going to define some of those for you and give you some examples to kind of help make that make sense for you.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And we can't cover everything, of course. There's a lot of terms out there that people use. So we kind of picked some of the stuff that comes out on a regular basis. So, yeah, hopefully this will give you some insight into what people are talking about when you go to your local Friday Night Magic and people are super excited about magic. So the first thing I think that we often hear is when people are describing their decks. They're asking kind of, what are you playing? And they get really excited to tell you that they're playing a Jund or Grixis deck. And you look at them and smile and go, oh, cool, that's really awesome. So what are the colors or what are those names that they're talking about?
All right. Well, the two color names, I'll just kind of go through them and then I'll just say, and you can do the three colors.
Sure.
I hate those ones. I can never remember those ones. So Azorius is white and blue. Demir has blue and black. Rakdos has black and red. Gruul has green and red. Celestia, my favorite, has green and white. Orzhov, which is another one of my favorites, has black and white. Izzet has blue and red. That's one that I don't like very much. And Golgari is black and green. And Boros is red and white. And Simic is green and blue.
Yeah. So yeah, that's basically what they're talking about. They're just saying the colors that they're using. Yeah, it's a little bit easier that rather than saying I'm playing a red, green, black deck, just to say Jund, and they just assume that people have a little bit of prior knowledge. I still have to look them up every single time.
Especially the three-color ones.
Don't feel bad. Ultimately, the three color ones, they come from way back when there were some shards, shards of Alara. And so if you haven't been playing that long, it's harder to remember those things. We remember the two color ones because we
played.
Yeah, Guilds of Ravnica has just come out. So we've gone to Ravnica again and we know the guilds because we've personally played with them and built decks around them. So it's a little bit easier. So if you've been playing for like a year or so, you probably know those ones. But let's quickly go through the three color ones for you. We have red, green, and black is Jund. We have white, green, and blue, which is Bant. We have black, red, and blue, which is Grixis. We have green, white, and red, which I personally love, and it's actually quite good elemental deck right now. Naya. And then we have blue, white, black, Esper. That's been around for a little bit. Like when you hear someone's playing an Esper control, they mean a blue, white, black control deck. Blue, red, and white is Namut, and red, white, and black is Mardu. So there are a few other names thrown in there. Oh, sorry. Jeskai is really the one that gets referred to the most with blue, red, and white. But Namut and Raka are also part of that. And then with the red, white, and black, it's mostly Mardu, but Oros and Dega. You sure make me do the long list. Okay, so then we also have black, green, and blue, which is Sultai mostly referred to, but it's also Vorosh and Anna. Wow. And then there is green, blue, and red, and that is also a wonderful elemental deck. Tamir, Intet, and Sita. And then, sorry if I'm saying them wrong. And then there's white, black, and green, which is Abzan, Teneb, Nakra, Junk, and Doran. So there's lots of different color names out there. If you're wondering, like ultimately deck names are really referring to the colors. So you can just assume that it is a certain combination of colors that they're talking about. Yeah, so that's colors. That's kind of one of the big things we wanted to cover today. But we have all kinds of other terms that people use all the time. And so we'll just kind of Go for it.
So aggro is a kind of deck that is really aggressive and really in your face very quickly. And yeah, like a red aggro deck, for example, it happens very quickly and you're like, whoa.
So do aggro decks have to be red?
No, not necessarily. A white deck could be an aggro deck. Some of my vampire decks are kind of aggro because they have a lot of creatures out very quickly.
And then you'll hear the term bear a lot. That card is just a bear. Basically, what they're talking about, they're referring to the card Grizzly Bear, which is a 2/2 for 2. It's basic. It's a vanilla card. It doesn't do anything else. It's just a creature. It's a 2/2 for 2. So if you ever hear someone talking about that card that is a 2/2 for 2 and they call it a bear, but it's a wolf, which doesn't make sense because that's not a bear. It's a wolf. They're talking about the reference to Grizzly Bear.
Yes.
So they're just mean 2/2 for 2.
And board presence. So a lot of times you'll hear people saying, oh, you have a good board presence, or you don't have a good board presence, which is my case a lot of times. So basically that means you have a lot of stuff on your board right at that moment. So you have a lot of creatures, enchantments, whatever going on. So you have a good board presence.
Or you'll hear too people saying, well, who's winning the game? And someone will respond with, well, I have more life, but they have more board presence. So doesn't necessarily mean you're winning the game. So the next one is bomb. And so you'll hear the term like, hey, what's your bomb? And you're like, well, I don't have any artifacts in my deck. I don't have any bombs. They're not talking about artifacts or a card called bomb. They're talking about your powerful card. Basically, it's a card that's powerful enough to change the course of the game or win you the game. So you think you're losing and all of a sudden you play this card and you're like, now I'm winning. So Lyra is a good example of that. You'll play her, you'll be down at 2-3 life and you put your Lyra out there. She's a 5/5 with vigilance and lifelink, and all of a sudden you're gaining life and you're back in the game. I like to use her. Do you have a favorite bomb?
Not her.
Try to cast her down. Nope.
Oh, well, Chandra was definitely my bomb in my pre-release.
Yeah,
she was my bomb.
Cool.
She did a lot of good stuff for me. The mythic Chandra, the newest one. Okay, so bounce. This is kind of a fun thing to do. So this bounce refers to being able to use a card that makes the other person or your own have to put a card back in your hand or to the top of your deck or somewhere besides the graveyard usually. And so, for example, Blink of an Eye is a really good example of that. I can use that to send a card. I can save one of my creatures, or I can just get rid of one of their really annoying creatures, put it back in the hand, and start over.
People will say like, hey, I'm going to bounce that.
Yeah.
That's what they mean. So burn is basically quick and simple. They're talking about anything that does direct damage. So I like to say I'm going to do 3 to your face. So target creature or player, but when you're burning someone, it's usually, or if you're playing a burn deck, it usually has a lot of things that do direct damage to something, whether it be the player or the creature.
So cantrip, this is a spell that lets you draw a card when it comes in. So one of the most recent ones that's kind of fun that I've played a few times is Blade Brand. So it makes your creature have death touch and allows you to draw a card. So at instant speed. So it's a little quick, suddenly I'm blocking with a death touch creature and drawing a card. So it's a really great little cantrip.
Great if they have flash too.
Yeah.
Cloudseeker is another one from the new set that has, when it comes in, it's a little 2/1 flyer that when it comes in, you draw a card.
There you go.
So also you'll hear the term, what does that card cost? Or, oh my goodness, that card was really expensive. Or what's the CMC of that card? All of that is not referring to how much you paid for the card on your favorite local game store. They're not talking about how much it costs to buy it. They're talking about how much it costs to play it. So CMC stands for converted mana cost. So yeah, if you ever hear, how expensive is that or how much does it cost, that's what they're referring to, how much the card costs to play.
All right, combo. So this it's short for combination. So a lot of people like to make decks that are around a certain combination of cards that will win them the game potentially. So one of the combos that I've played is the Famished Paladin sorcerer's wand, and then you put some sort of lifelink onto the famished paladin. So it could be something like sorry, I can't remember that card. I wrote it down. Squire's Devotion. You put Squire's Devotion onto the paladin, and so then it is an unlimited. You just happen to do 1 damage until the person's dead.
Yeah. So there's lots of combo decks out there.
Yeah.
You can look for them on the internet.
What? Internet.
I can talk today. And or come up with them yourself. But basically, it's just cards that it doesn't mean it has to together. Doesn't have to be an infinite combo.
No. But
they combo together, or they go together really well.
To do something really crazy.
Control. So control is basically anything that you try to. Blue has a lot of control in it. If someone's a blue player, they're usually very controlling. I always say when I'm talking to new players about what deck they might like, if I say if you're really controlling, this is the deck for you. But basically it's anything that kind of tries to control the flow of the game. So cancel is a good example of a counter spell. That you can basically counter a target spell. There's lots of counter spells out there. There's other things. It doesn't have to be a cancel or any like a cancel a spell or counter a spell to control the game. There's other ways to control the game, but that's a good example.
You're not letting the other person play.
Yeah.
Basically. Okay, so curve. So this is the power of your cards in your deck. So we talk about a mana curve. We've talked about it several times in many of our videos and podcasts. So you want a nice smooth curve in your deck to have a few lower cost, lots of middle cost, and then a few higher cost cards.
Right.
It's kind of how it
But
works.
what does it mean when they're talking about, that's the mana curve, which we'll get to. But what does it mean when a card is on curve?
Oh, sorry. Forgot that's what we're talking about. So a card is on curve when its cost is the same as its toughness and power. So for example, Centaur Courser, which is a 3/3 for 3, sorry. And it's a really good 3-drop, as they say, because it's a mana cost of 3 and it's a 3/3.
Cool. And then there is decking, which is a win con, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But basically you'll hear, well, how'd you win? Oh, I decked him out. And it doesn't mean that they like punched him, decked him out. And that made him win the game because the guy was unconscious. No. So decking means that the player runs out of cards in their library. And basically when you go to draw a card and there's no cards in your library, you lose the game unless you have Jace. But we won't talk about that. So Ashiok is a good way to kind of mill your opponent. It's also called milling, I guess, is another term for it. So
there's no cards left for you to draw.
Okay,
digging. So digging refers to being able to draw or look at a bunch of cards in your deck to be able to get to a certain card that you're looking for. So for example, Tamiyo's Epiphany is one of my favorites. For that, because you can scry 4. So scry means you get to look at 4 cards and then you get to draw 2 of those. So scry lets you put those cards at the top of your deck or at the bottom of your deck in whatever order you want. So then you can set it up so you can draw those 2 cards that you want, basically. Yeah.
And then we have disruption. People talk a lot about, well, this is a disruption deck. So what they're meaning is basically there's cards out there that try to disrupt the game in some way. So you might ask someone to discard a card or several cards, or you might counter their spells. But basically you're just, even Ashiok that we showed earlier, it exiles their graveyard. So if they have a lot of things that they're trying to bring back from the graveyard, you've disrupted them from doing what they're going to do.
And mess with their game.
Exactly. So Vicious Rumors is a good example of that. It does 1 damage to each opponent. Each opponent discards a card, and you put the top card of their library into their graveyard. So a lot of disruption going on in that card for 1 mana cost. It's a great little card.
So Dork, you'll hear us talking about mana dorks.
We're not talking about Magic Players, although sometimes they're dorks. I am one of them.
Yes, when she plays her Lyra. No. Anyway, a dork is a card that you can use. It doesn't really do much other than maybe giving you some mana. So that's, for example, the Llanowar Elves. Everybody knows about that card pretty much. Paradise Druid is a new one that's out right now, and it's it's a good little mana dork. You're not going to use them to attack the person. You're going to just have them sitting there doing their job.
Mm-hmm. And then we have drop. And actually, we've already used this term. So when someone talks about something being a 2-drop or a 3-drop, what they're again referring to is the mana cost. So a 2-drop means that it costs 2 to play for that turn. So yeah, that's basically it. What do you mean you drop your cards?
Yeah, exactly.
You don't drop your
You
cards.
drop them on the table.
Yeah.
Dude is just basically a creature. Just stuff that you got out there on the board. That's
your
creatures.
dudes. Your dudes are your creatures.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not Dude Ranch, but a deck called Dude Ranch. Anyway, sorry, I digress. So this actually, I had gotten this question a couple times from new players because it's not called this anymore. So EDH, what does EDH stand for? Ultimately, what it stands for is Elder Dragon Highlander, but that was what Commander used to be called. Basically, they're just referring to Commander. So it's called Commander now. All you older players out there, when you're talking to newer players, please don't use terms that come from 20 years ago or 15 years ago or even 10 years ago.
And still, like when you're searching for decks online, it's really hard to find quite often because they're still referred to that deck, the Commander deck, as an EDH deck. So it's like,
but now that you know, EDH means Commander. They're talking about Commander decks.
Yep. Enter the battlefield. So one of my favorite enter the battlefield cards is Ravenous Chupacabra. So what that means is it's a card that when it enters the battlefield, it does something. So Ravenous Chupacabra, for example, destroys a target creature when it comes in. So I'll have him enter the battlefield as many times as I can.
Yeah. Often referred to as ETB, which is why it's kind of confusing sometimes. So evasion, we hear a lot about like put some of it. We've actually used that term. You need some evasion in your decks if you on pre-release and or drafting
all the time.
So, and we have explained it a little bit, but we'll put it in our list anyway. So evasion is basically a creature that improves its chances of doing damage to the defending player because it has some ability like flying or menace or even death touch that makes it so it either can't be blocked. Something that is just a little bit better. So Empyrean Eagle is a nice 2/3 flyer. It gives all your other flyers +1/+1, which is awesome for your other evasion creatures. So I love that.
So fire breathing, this is a term that I've only learned probably a couple weeks ago kind of thing. I'd never really heard it referred to as that, but it's for those dragons and those sort of red cards that let you once it's out there, it's an ability on the card to pay mana to make it deal damage or buff it up.
I love fire breathing.
Yeah.
But that's because I love dragons. But fire breathing just is non-dragons.
There's non-dragons too?
There's other creatures that have fire breathing. Goblins,
like
there's some goblins and elementals
do that
have
too.
fire breathing as well.
Yeah.
So example of that?
An example of that is Shivan Dragon, which is in pretty much every new player's welcome
decks.
pack.
Red welcome deck.
Because it's just a good all-around card.
Cool. So then we hear you may have heard the term glass cannon, or that deck was a glass cannon. Basically what they're referring to is a deck that has high potential, but it's really easily disrupted. So we talked about disruption a little bit earlier. Things like that cancel your creatures or kill your creatures or make you mill your creatures. So basically a glass cannon is any deck that Leslie plays.
Which is so not true. Don't listen to her.
It is totally true. I always lose because of disruption, but that's okay. I need to figure out a way to get around that. Everything has hexproof or something like that. But so just a glass cannon is basically...
Or a deck that only has one win condition. Yeah. There used to be a Teferi deck running around that only had Teferi in it, pretty much. That was its only win condition. So if you took away all their Teferis with Excellence Binding... Not that we wouldn't do that. Apparently we have.
We might have been prepared for that.
And then they can't win the game because they've got nothing else going on. So, yeah.
Well, and glass cannons aren't just decks either. They're cards. There's some cards, for example, Gulta. I love playing with Gulta, but it's a bit of a glass cannon because it's a 12/12, but it's one creature that's a 12/12. And so one murder 1 mortify, 1 cast down, 1 anything that removes that creature, it's dead. So you spent all this time trying to get your Galta out, and now it's dead. So that's Glass Cannon. Griefer. Why don't you talk about Griefers?
Griefer. Player who enjoys another player's misery, tormenting that opponent by playing land destruction,
Corvus,
countering all their spells, or playing a deck that wins before they can get off the ground.
Yeah. Leslie.
Yeah. So
I'm gonna fully admit I am sometimes a griefer. I totally love it when my red deck wind goes off and like turn 4 they're almost dead or dead. And they're like, what the heck just happened? But you don't want to be a griefer all the time because then no one will want to play with you. So don't be a griefer all the time. Just be a griefer some of the time.
And you really need to win.
Exactly.
Speaking of winning, lethal, an opportunity to deal enough damage to that person to win the game. So, yeah, if you've removed their last blocker that they have out and you swing in for the last 4 damage, you have lethal.
Yeah. So mana curve, we talked a little bit about that. We have lots of videos on that, so we won't go over it too much, but basically that refers to when someone's talking about what's your mana curve, they're wondering what that bell curve is on how much your creatures cost to cast, your converted mana cost. So you want a mana curve that comes up really nicely and goes down in the 2 to 3 zone. It should be at the top. Most of your cards should be in there. And then it kind of comes down on each side with less cards. So that's what it's talking about mana curve wise.
So mana fixing, it certainly comes into play a lot more with limited because you're trying to fudge together a deck. So quite often you'll need something that's going to give you that mana that you're looking for your particular card. So for example, I had to play 3 colors for our recent pre-release. So I needed to put in cards that would give me any color of mana basically, or that would help. So like Swiftwater Cliffs, for example, has blue and red. It could be blue or red, so that helps in those situations where I suddenly don't have any blue, right? Or that Lotus Field, which can be any color once you get it out there. So, yeah.
And then you'll hear people talk about the metagame. What's the metagame doing right now? Or wow, can you believe that metagame? Basically, what they're talking about is all the other decks that are out there that you can play, and it's really important for you to know what you're playing. But if you know the metagame, you also know what everybody else is playing and what decks are doing good so that you can figure out how to disrupt those decks.
Exactly. Be able to know what's out there.
Yeah.
Okay, mid-range that Leslie doesn't believe exists anymore.
It exists. It just doesn't win.
It doesn't win very often, according to Leslie. So it's a general type of deck that I don't know, is focused on playing medium to larger creatures, basically. Kind of, I don't know how else you would explain it.
Yeah, basically just right in the middle.
Yeah.
And then there's net decking, which you should not feel embarrassed about, but you should also be creative yourself.
But speaking of that metagame piece, right?
Yes.
It's like,
so net decking is basically any deck that you find on the internet, published in tournament lists. Basically, you're looking for a place to start or a winning game. In fact, Wizards has jumped on board with the net decking, and they've decided that they would make challenger decks that are based on the winning decks from the last Pro Tour. So nothing wrong with net decking. No. It's a good place to start before you know how to build your own decks. And then once you have played for a while, you probably want to try some of your own stuff.
Exactly. Poppers. So this is a really fun format where all the cards are common. So nothing can be over a common card. So that's just a fun little thing. There are popper cards that are actually worth quite a bit of money. So, and then there's Pip. Pip, I just used with some new players, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry."
I didn't know what that was either. Isn't that a Pip from In the Night Garden? But it is basically the little symbols on the card that tell you what color the card is. So your mountain symbol, your forest symbol, your swamp symbol, those are your pips. And so there might be three forest symbols. That's 3 green pips. So often when I'm talking to new players and we're talking about how much mana you should put in your deck, I say, well, count the number of pips for each of those colors. That's what we're talking about, is the pips, not the colorless part, just the colored part.
All right, pumping. So this is to temporarily or even permanently beef up your creature's power and or toughness. And one of my favorites is Giant Growth. All of a sudden my creature gets a, was it +3/+3, which is awesome.
At instant speed.
At instant speed.
Usually you do that during your combat phase.
Yes.
Save your instants if you can for combat, because you want to be tricky.
Tricky.
And we have ramp or mana ramp. Quite often you'll hear, well, do you have enough ramp in your deck? Or if you're playing green, for example, and you have a lot of big creatures, you have to put ramp in your deck. They're not talking about a wheelchair ramp. They're talking about something that allows you to get more mana. So your mana dorks, like your Druid of the Cowl, something that taps for mana, or other ways to get more mana in. Maybe your mana taps twice, or every time you tap a mana, it taps for 2. That would be an example of mana ramp.
So removal, I like to play a deck called Murder, Death, Kill, and it has a lot of removal in it.
It's a great deck.
And so basically that just is going to remove a permanent from my opponent. So for example, murder, which keeps getting reprinted, which is awesome. I love it.
One of the most important things you can put in your deck.
Removal. You want to get rid of their bombs. As we were talking about.
Yep. Another thing that Shauna likes to do is sack her creatures to do bad things. So sack, what the heck does sack mean? Basically, they're just talking about sacrificing a permanent. Usually it's a creature. So Priest of the Forgotten Gods is a good example of that. And basically you can sacrifice 2 other creatures, and any number of target players each lose 2 life and sacrifice creature
their own
themselves.
creatures.
So they have to sack as well. So
It's very fun.
yeah.
Try it.
You should.
All right, side, in, and out. So a lot of players talk about their sideboard. When you're playing in a best of 3 matches, you want to figure out which cards you can use to counteract the deck that you just played against after your first game. So you'll use your sideboard and side in those cards and side out some cards that aren't effective. So for example, if they're not playing creature cards and you have an Essence Scatter in your main deck, you want to take those out. Unless they're going to trick you. But anyway, yeah. And then bring in something else that's going to disrupt their Tefiris or whatever.
Yeah. And then we have splash. This does not mean get your cards wet. Please don't get your cards wet. Unless you have sleeves on them, and then even then, please don't get your cards wet.
You won't want to
when they're talking about splashing, they just basically mean most decks are going to be 2 colors on average. But sometimes you have to splash another color in there. It's basically just mean adding a little bit of another color to give some more options to your deck. Maybe you splash red for removal, or you splash black for removal.
Yeah. Which is why I had to play 3 colors.
Yeah.
Stompy. This is Leslie's favorite.
Yeah.
She likes to make those big creatures, get out her big Steel Leaf Champion, for example, which is a 5/4 for 3 mana. So it is a stomp. It's going to run you over very quickly. You only have 20 life. So if you don't do something about that guy, you're going to be dead.
He gets out really
4 turns.
quick, yeah.
So yeah, that's really aggressive green thing is usually
aggressive. Be aggressive.
That's usually what people refer to as the stompy decks, or the big green guys that are going to run you over with their big guys.
Yep. You'll also hear the term tapped out. You'll say a lot of times, and this happens to me actually when because I always wait for my opponent to say pass. So I'll say, "Are you done?" And then they'll look at me like, "I'm tapped out." Well, what do you mean I'm tapped out?
There are cards for 0 mana,
right?
Just saying.
You're just asking. Anyways, tapped out means that all of the mana that you could use is already tapped, and you have no way to play anything because you have no mana left. You're tapped out.
I still say you need to say pass the turn.
We were just raised to be polite.
Exactly. All right. But this isn't polite.
This is not polite.
When you play tricks or combat tricks. So like that Giant Growth was, or another one is Moment of Heroism. So it's those you're in combat and the person thinks that they're going to be blocking a 3/3 and suddenly it becomes a 6/6.
Yeah.
That's a combat trick.
Rude.
Very rude. So that's not polite.
But
so you're allowed to occasionally
not be polite in
so,
that case,
like we
because
said,
that's just part of the game.
Everything we know about magic, that's probably wrong, but fun to talk about.
Fun to talk about.
Oh dear.
And then tutor. So I hear this when I first started playing. I heard this all the time, and you hear it more from modern players than you do from standard players. Yes. But they talk about, oh yeah, I need to add some more tutor into my deck, or I need to tutor some. I tutored that in. Basically, a tutor is a spell that allows a player to search their library for another card. A lot of them have the term tutor right in their title. So examples of that would be mystical tutor or enlightened tutor. But there are tutors out there that don't have tutor in their name. So Forerunner of the Legion, or any of the Forerunners that were in Rivals of Ixalan, that allow you to search your library for a card and bring it to the battlefield.
Or top of your deck is what those ones did.
Or these ones, yeah, exactly. Top of your deck or into your hand. Anything that kind of lets you search your library for a specific card is a tutor.
You don't have to wait for it.
Yeah.
Ultimate. So you'll hear people talking about the ultimate on their Planeswalker card. So that is generally it's the last thing on the Planeswalker card. So, for example, Teferi's ultimate, which is stupid, I have to say. If you let Teferi get to that point where he can do Teferi's ultimate and basically exile your permanents for the rest of the game, that's pretty much going to win the game. There's not a lot you can do after that.
Yeah. And you have to watch the ultimate. So if people are playing with Planeswalkers, just take a moment and say, well, what's its ultimate? Or you'll hear that often because it's really good kind of tip to know what is coming for you if you let that get to ultimate. So we put Teferi in there because we don't like talking about Teferi. So this was a good example, a good opportunity.
For you Teferi lovers out there, we'll let you have it.
Teferi is not a good guy. I know he is technically. But
technically he's a good guy, but he's not. Not against our decks anyways.
No, we love Teferi.
Vanilla. So this is the opposite
like
of
vanilla
the
milk,
Teferi's.
vanilla cookies.
Vanilla, yeah. Just
she's like, shut up, I'm trying to talk.
Kind of very plain little creatures that are just in there for a body to just use. So Goblin Assailant, for example, which is technically a bear. So basically it's a 2/2 for 2 that doesn't have any extra bonus.
No abilities,
just he's just there.
But I just was listening to the last weekly MTG, and Mark Rosewater used the term virtual vanilla that they've been calling things. And I thought that was kind of fun and a little bit of a new term that's out there. Basically, a virtual vanilla, what they're referring to is a card that comes into the battlefield with an effect, but then it's just a dude after that. So the Savannah Sage is a 2 life, and then after that, it's just a 2/2 for 2.
There's lots of those kind of cards. All right, and weenie. So you'll hear people talking about a white weenie deck or any sort of deck that's got a whole bunch of little guys. So my vampires are kind of a weenie deck a little bit. So one of the most popular ones you'll see right now is Healer's Hawk is one of the cards in a white weenie deck because it's a 1/1 for 1. So you can get 4 of them out really quickly. For example, Spectral Sailor is the one that just came out right now that I'm seeing in a bunch of decks too. It's really fun to play. It's a little 1/1 and it can draw you cards later on. So basically it's a deck that's going to have a lot of little creatures really quickly and hopefully overrun the opponent is the plan. But they have some weaknesses.
They do.
Another day.
Yeah, exactly. So win condition, when someone asks you what your win condition is, they're wondering how you win the game with your deck. So there's lots of win conditions out there. We picked a couple. I mean, the basic win condition that's out there is you kill your opponent. They die because they have no life. That's a win condition.
Basically,
yeah. But there's other win conditions out there that are super fun. So one of my favorites is Felidar Sovereign. When at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 40 or more life, you win the game. So super fun card. I used to play that when it was in Standard all the time. I'm working on my cat deck that will win it in Modern as well. But it's a bit of a glass cannon.
Yeah. Easily disrupted.
Easily disrupted. And you have a fun win condition.
I have
that
a
you
fun
like.
one too, Veraska Golgari Queen. So I do like to play black and green sometimes. And so her ultimate, we talked about ultimate, what that means. Her ultimate is that you get an emblem that says anytime one of your creatures does damage to an opposing player, that player loses the game.
Yeah.
Simple as that. It could be one combat damage, and
yeah,
they're dead.
Lots of fun ones. We'd love to hear like your favorite win condition. So let us know in the comments or tweet us out.
Hopefully, have more than one. Win condition.
Yeah, it's good to think about more than one win condition.
Yes.
But yeah. And then the last one we have on our list is pronounced Wooburg. People will say, "Oh yeah, it's a Wooburg deck," and you're like, "A what
the heck is
deck?"
That?
Wooburg. They're talking about WUBRG, which stands for white, blue, black, red, and green. They use U for blue because
which I didn't know.
There's
for the longest
because there is two things that start with B, so they went with the U instead. So Wooburg is basically the 5 colors of magic. There's lots of cards out there that have Wooburg on them. So the one from the new set is Golos, the Tireless Pilgrim. He's a colorless card, but down in his abilities, he has Wooburg and 2.
Mm-hmm.
So
that people say that.
Yeah, exactly. So that concludes our tutorial on all the things that Magic players say that you might not understand and that we sometimes don't understand ourselves. So hope that it was informative for you, and if you have ones out there that people have used and that it took you a long time or that you hear often, please
people should know.
Let us know. Keep the conversation going. Yeah. Thank you for watching us today, and in the meantime, tap those magic cards and have fun doing it. Bye guys.